When Captain Morrison's voice crackled over the intercom announcing that Flight 447 couldn't depart without me, every person who had dismissed me suddenly realized they'd made a very expensive mistake. Let me take you back to where it all started, 3 days earlier. The automatic doors of Denver International's main terminal slid open with their familiar whoosh, and I stepped into the chaos of holiday travel. December 22nd, peak season for entitled travelers and frazzled airline staff. My dress blues felt heavier than usual, not from the weight of the fabric, but from the weight of what I was carrying back home. After 6 years away, I was finally returning to Colorado Springs for my father's funeral. Lieutenant Sarah Chen, 25 years old, decorated combat engineer, recipient of 2 Bronze Stars and a Purple Heart, and apparently completely invisible to everyone around me. The morning had started rough. I'd caught the earliest shuttle from Fort Carson, where I'd been stationed for exactly 3 days, just long enough to process my emergency leave paperwork. My duffel bag contained the few possessions that mattered: Dad's last letter, still unopened, a photo of us from my graduation from West Point, and the funeral program that someone had emailed me because I hadn't been home to help plan it. The first sign should have been the airline check-in counter: Atlantic Airways, Gate B23, Flight 447 to Colorado Springs Regional. I stood in the premium line, my military ID clearly visible, dress uniform pristine, combat boots polished to a mirror shine, while the desk agent, a woman named Brenda according to her name tag, looked right through me like I was made of glass. "Ma'am, this line is for first-class passengers only," she said with that practiced smile that never reached her eyes. Her voice carried that particular brand of condescension, reserved for people she assumed couldn't afford to be where they were standing. I held up my ticket, trying to keep my voice steady. "I am first class, military priority booking." The ticket was clear as day, 3A, purchased with my emergency travel authorization. She barely glanced at it, her fingers already hovering over her keyboard with obvious reluctance. "Oh," no apology, no acknowledgement, just a dismissive "oh," as she processed my boarding pass with the enthusiasm of someone handling contaminated laundry. Her eyes swept over my uniform with what could only be described as skepticism, as if my medals were Halloween decorations rather than earned honors. Behind me, a man in an expensive suit, designer everything from his Italian leather shoes to his entitled attitude, made an impatient noise. "Some of us have real business to attend to," he muttered, loud enough for me to hear but quiet enough to maintain plausible deniability. I turned slightly. James Whitmore, according to the luggage tag hanging from his briefcase. CEO of Whitmore Defense Solutions, based on the corporate logo, embossed in gold. The irony hit me immediately. A man who profited from military contracts, treating actual military personnel like inconveniences. "Military priority means she gets whatever seat she wants," said a voice from the side. A young airport employee, maybe 20, with kind eyes and a name tag reading Marcus Williams. He was pushing a wheelchair for an elderly passenger, but he'd stopped to help. His voice carried the quiet confidence of someone who'd seen enough disrespect to recognize it instantly. Brenda's smile turned arctic. "We handle these situations according to company policy, Marcus. Perhaps you should focus on your assigned duties." Situations. Like my service was an inconvenience to be managed, rather than honored. Marcus caught my eye and shook his head slightly, a gesture that said everything about what he thought of his colleague's attitude. "Thank you," I mouthed silently, and he nodded once before continuing with his passenger. The humiliation continued as Brenda took an unnecessarily long time processing my ticket, double-checking information that was clearly correct, making phone calls that were obviously unnecessary. Behind me, the line grew longer, and I could feel the impatience radiating from other passengers who were now blaming me for the delay. "Is there a problem with her ticket?" Whitmore asked, his voice carrying the assumption that there must be some mistake, some reason why someone like me would be in first class. "Just following protocol," Brenda replied, finally printing my boarding pass with obvious reluctance. She handed it to me without making eye contact. "Gate B23. Boarding begins at 2:15. "No, thank you for your service. No acknowledgement of the uniform I wore or what it represented. just the bare minimum of customer service delivered with maximum disdain. The pattern continued at security. Despite having TSA pre-check clearance, a benefit of my military status, I was randomly selected for additional screening. The odds of this being truly random were about as likely as winning the lottery twice in one day. Agent Rodriguez, according to his badge, directed me to a separate line where I watched other passengers breeze through the standard scanners. My boots were removed and swabbed for explosives, boots that had walked through actual minefields in Afghanistan. My uniform was inspected with suspicious thoroughness. My medals were questioned as if they might be dangerous weapons in disguise. "What's this one for?" Rodriguez asked, pointing to my Bronze Star with V device for valor. "Saving lives under enemy fire," I replied simply, keeping my voice neutral despite the anger building in my chest. He didn't seem impressed. If anything, he seemed skeptical, as if my answer was rehearsed rather than lived. "And this one?" He pointed to my Purple Heart. "Getting injured while saving those lives." Still, no acknowledgement, no respect, no understanding of what those pieces of metal and ribbon actually meant. Just bureaucratic box checking performed with the efficiency of someone who saw military personnel as potential threats rather than protectors. The additional screening took 20 minutes. 20 minutes of having my belongings rifled through, my body scanned repeatedly, my credentials questioned. 20 minutes of watching civilians walk through security in 2 minutes flat while I was treated like a suspected terrorist. When I finally made it through, I had 30 minutes until boarding. Enough time to grab coffee and try to center myself before facing whatever awaited me at Dad's funeral. The airport's Starbucks was a study in social dynamics. Business travelers in expensive suits got warm smiles and expedited service. Families with children received patient assistance. Young professionals were treated with friendly efficiency. When my turn came, the barista, a college-aged kid named Tyler, looked at me with the same dismissive expression I'd been seeing all morning. "What can I get you?" "Large coffee black, please." He barely looked up as he rang me up. "That'll be $3.85. I handed him a $5 bill. He made change with mechanical precision, no small talk, no acknowledgement of my uniform. Just transaction completed, next customer please. Contrast that with his interaction with the businessman behind me, James Whitmore, I realized, the same man from check-in. "Good morning, sir. What can I get started for you today?" Tyler's entire demeanor transformed. Suddenly, he was animated, friendly, engaging. "Double shot cappuccino, extra hot," Whitmore ordered without looking up from his phone. "Absolutely. Coming right up. Business or pleasure today?" "Business. Always business. Got a major deal closing this afternoon." "That's exciting. Good luck with that." The contrast was stark. For Whitmore, warmth, enthusiasm, genuine interest. For me, cold efficiency and obvious desire to move on to the next customer. I found a seat near my gate and tried to process what I was feeling. It wasn't just disappointment. I'd experienced enough casual disrespect to be somewhat immune to it. It was the cumulative weight of being consistently invisible, especially when heading home to bury the man who'd taught me that service meant something. Dad had been career military, 30 years in the Army Corps of Engineers, retiring as a full colonel. He'd drilled into me from childhood that wearing the uniform meant something, that it represented sacrifice and service that deserved respect. He'd been so proud when I followed in his footsteps, earning my commission through West Point, excelling in combat engineering, deploying to Afghanistan twice. And now he was gone, and I was sitting in an airport being treated like my service meant nothing. At the gate, more of the same. Families with small children got priority boarding, which was fine. I understood that. Military personnel were supposed to board with Group 1, immediately after first class. But somehow that got overlooked, as gate agent Patricia Hammond called for Diamond Elite members, then Platinum members, then Gold members, then valued customers who've been with us for over 5 years. By the time she finally called military personnel in Group 1, half the plane was already boarded, and the overhead compartments near my seat were full. "Excuse me," I said to Patricia, showing her my boarding pass. "I believe military boards with first class." She glanced at my pass, then at my uniform with the same skeptical expression I'd been seeing all day. "We've already called first class. You'll need to board with your assigned group." My assigned group is supposed to be with first class. Military priority boarding. Quote. A heavy sigh, as if I was being unreasonably difficult. "I'll have to check with the gate supervisor." 5 minutes of whispered conversations and phone calls later, during which dozens of other passengers boarded ahead of me, Patricia returned. "You can board now, but you'll need to find space for your carry-on wherever you can." The flight attendants continued the pattern. Jennifer Walsh, according to her name tag, greeted me with professional politeness, the kind reserved for passengers who were present but not important. No eye contact, no genuine acknowledgement of my service, just the minimum required courtesy, delivered with the warmth of an automated announcement. "Welcome aboard," she said without looking at me, already moving on to the next passenger. But when Whitmore boarded moments later, her entire demeanor shifted. "Mr. Whitmore, so wonderful to see you again. How was your trip to Denver?" "Productive. Thank you, Jennifer, though I'll be glad to get home." "Of course. Can I get you anything to drink before we take off? Perhaps some champagne? I know you prefer the Dom Perignon." He didn't even look up from his phone. Just waved her away like she was a mosquito. "Not now. I'm on an important call." Despite his dismissiveness, Jennifer continued hovering, offering assistance he clearly didn't want or appreciate. But for me, nothing. No offer of a pre-flight beverage, no acknowledgement of my uniform, no "thank you for your service." I might as well have been part of the seat cushion. I settled into seat 3A, stowing my cap in what little overhead space remained, and tried to focus on the reason for my trip. Dad's funeral was tomorrow at 1400 hours at Fort Carson's Memorial Chapel, full military honors, as befitted his rank and service record. The irony wasn't lost on me that he'd receive more respect in death than I was receiving in life. The guilt sat heavier on my chest than my service ribbons. I'd missed his final days because I was halfway around the world, leading a team of engineers and building schools in Afghanistan. Noble work, necessary work, but it meant I wasn't there when he needed me most. I'd missed saying goodbye by 18 hours, long enough for him to die alone, waiting for a daughter who was too dedicated to duty to be present for duty to family. As passengers continued boarding, I observed the social ecosystem of first class. Whitmore dominated the space with his phone calls, discussing merger details with the volume and entitlement of someone who'd never learned that other people existed. "I don't care if it's Christmas Eve," he barked into his phone. "If this deal doesn't close today, we lose everything. Get me Martinez on the line immediately. And tell him if he's not available, he can find another job." The woman behind me was Dr. Patricia Reynolds, according to the boarding announcement. She was apparently a prominent cardiac surgeon heading to some medical conference in Colorado Springs. Her phone conversation was equally self-important. The maintenance issue with the jet was completely unacceptable, she huffed to whoever was unfortunate enough to be on the other end of her call. "I have life-saving procedures scheduled tomorrow morning. This commercial flight delay could literally cost lives, do you understand? Lives are at stake because of mechanical incompetence. Lives. Like the ones I'd risked my own to save in Afghanistan. Like the school children who were alive because my team had cleared the IEDs from around their building. Like the Afghan interpreters who could sleep safely because we'd reinforced their compound against mortar attacks." But somehow, Dr. Reynolds' rescheduled medical conference was more important than my father's funeral. Across the aisle, a tech entrepreneur named David Kumar was loudly discussing his latest startup acquisition. "The valuation is completely justified," he was saying. "We're disrupting the entire healthcare logistics space. This acquisition puts us ahead of the competition by at least 2 years." Behind him, Margaret Foster, a real estate mogul, according to the conversation I couldn't help overhearing, was berating someone about a property deal. "I don't care if the sellers are having cold feet. We have a contract. Enforce it. If they back out now, I'll sue them into bankruptcy." And in the midst of all this self-important chatter, I sat quietly, processing the loss of the only person who'd ever truly understood what service meant. As we prepared for departure, I noticed something odd. Captain Morrison, the pilot, kept walking through the cabin, checking on things that flight attendants usually handled. He paused near my row, studying the passenger manifest in his hand with unusual intensity. His eyes met mine briefly, the first person all day to actually see me rather than look through me, before he continued to the cockpit. There was something in his expression I couldn't quite read. Recognition? Concern? I couldn't tell, but it was different from the dismissive glances I'd been receiving all day. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your Captain Morrison speaking. We're just completing our final pre-flight checks and should be backing away from the gate momentarily. But then we sat and sat and sat. 15 minutes turned to 30. 30 turned to 45. The cabin temperature seemed to rise with the passengers' frustration levels. Phones came out, angry calls were made, complaints were lodged with increasingly irritated flight attendants. Whitmore was particularly vocal. This is completely unacceptable. I have a merger closing in 3 hours. Do you people understand what millions of dollars in lost revenue means? Dr. Reynolds joined the chorus. I have patients depending on me. This delay could literally be the difference between life and death for people scheduled for surgery tomorrow. Kumar started pacing the aisle. I'm missing the most important meeting of my career. This could cost my company everything we've worked for. Foster was on her phone with what sounded like her lawyer. I need to know our options for suing the airline for damages. This delay is costing me a multi-million-dollar deal. Through it all, I sat quietly, thinking about Dad. About how he'd taught me that sometimes the most important thing you can do is wait patiently while others around you lose their composure. About how true strength isn't displayed through loud complaints or angry demands, but through quiet dignity in the face of adversity. Finally, Captain Morrison's voice came over the intercom again, but this time his words would change everything. Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for the continued delay. We've discovered that we cannot legally depart without a specific passenger who was supposed to be on this flight. This is not a typical situation, and we're currently working with federal authorities to resolve it. I ask for your patience as we sort this out. The cabin erupted in frustrated murmurs and outright complaints. Several passengers unbuckled their seatbelts and stood up, demanding answers from the flight crew. Who are we waiting for? Whitmore demanded. And why should an entire plane of important people be delayed for one passenger? This is ridiculous, Dr. Reynolds added. Can't you just leave without them? Quote, I sat quietly, wondering who they were waiting for and why it was taking so long. Someone important enough to delay an entire flight? Someone with enough authority to keep federal officials involved? I had no idea that passenger was me. And I had no idea that by the time this flight landed, everyone who had ignored me would know exactly who Lieutenant Sarah Chen really was, and why Captain Morrison was willing to delay a plane full of angry VIPs rather than leave without me. But that revelation was still coming. For now, I just sat in my seat, thinking about Dad, and wondering what kind of person could possibly be important enough to hold up an entire commercial flight. 20 minutes into the delay, the atmosphere in the cabin had shifted from frustrated murmuring to outright hostility. Whitmore was pacing the narrow first-class aisle like a caged animal, his phone permanently attached to his ear as he barked orders at subordinates who were probably scrambling to salvage his precious merger. I don't care what you have to do, he was saying, his voice carrying throughout the cabin despite his attempts at discretion. Delay the signing until I get there. Offer them whatever concessions they want, but do not let them walk away from this deal. Dr. Reynolds had cornered flight attendant Jennifer near the galley, her voice rising with each word. This is completely unacceptable. I have 3 cardiac procedures scheduled for tomorrow morning. Do you understand what that means? People could die because of this delay. Jennifer's professional smile was beginning to crack around the edges. I understand your concern, Dr. Reynolds, but this is beyond our control. The captain has assured us. The captain needs to make a decision, Reynolds snapped. One passenger cannot hold up an entire flight. It's unconscionable. Meanwhile, Kumar had enlisted Margaret Foster in what appeared to be a passenger revolt. They were moving through the cabin, gathering support for their demand to take off without the mysterious missing passenger. This is setting a dangerous precedent, Foster was saying to anyone who would listen. Airlines can't just hold paying customers hostage for one person, no matter who they think they are. Kumar nodded emphatically. Exactly. We have rights as passengers. This could be considered false imprisonment. I watched this unfold from my seat, fascinated by the entitled behavior on display. These people, who likely controlled millions of dollars and thousands of employees, were throwing tantrums like children denied their favorite toy. A businessman from economy class had pushed his way into first class, his face red with indignation. "I'm going to miss my daughter's wedding rehearsal because of this," he announced to no one in particular. 23 years I've been planning for this moment, and some VIP thinks they can just delay a commercial flight? The irony wasn't lost on me. They all assumed the missing passenger was some kind of celebrity or politician, someone who thought they were more important than everyone else. None of them considered that maybe, just maybe, there was a legitimate reason for the delay that had nothing to do with entitlement. That's when I noticed Captain Morrison emerge from the cockpit again. This time, he wasn't alone. Behind him walked a man in a dark suit with the unmistakable bearing of federal law enforcement. FBI, if I had to guess, based on the way he carried himself and the small earpiece partially visible beneath his collar. The cabin fell silent as the two men made their way down the aisle. Morrison was still carrying his passenger manifest, but now he also had what looked like official documents in a manila folder. "Ladies and gentlemen," Morrison announced, his voice carrying the authority that comes from 30 years of aviation experience. "I need to address the situation directly. We are indeed waiting for a specific passenger, and I want to be clear about why this delay is not only necessary but legally mandated." Whitmore stepped forward, his chest puffed out with self-importance. "Captain, with all due respect, no single passenger has the right to delay an entire commercial flight. I don't care who they think they are." Morrison's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes hardened. "Mr. Whitmore, is it? The passenger we're waiting for isn't delayed by choice. They're here, on this aircraft right now." A confused murmur rippled through the cabin. Dr. Reynolds pushed forward. "That's impossible. If they're here, why can't we take off?" The FBI agent stepped forward, his voice calm, but carrying unmistakable authority. "Because until 30 minutes ago, we weren't aware that Lieutenant Sarah Chen was on this flight." The use of my name sent a shock through my system like touching a live wire. Every head in the cabin turned toward me, and suddenly I was the center of attention in a way I'd never wanted to be. Morrison consulted his documents. "Lieutenant Chen, would you please stand?" I rose slowly, my mind racing. How did they know I was here? Why was the FBI involved? And why was a federal agent talking about me, like I was someone important? "Lieutenant Chen is not just any passenger," Morrison continued, his voice carrying throughout the now silent cabin. "She is the recipient of the Congressional Medal of Honor, awarded 3 weeks ago for extraordinary heroism in Afghanistan." The silence that followed was deafening. You could have heard a pin drop in that cabin. Every passenger who had dismissed me, ignored me, or treated me like I was invisible suddenly looked like they'd been slapped. The Congressional Medal of Honor, the highest military decoration in the United States, awarded to only 3,500 people in the entire history of our nation. And I was one of them. The FBI agent continued where Morrison left off. "The ceremony was classified until this week due to the sensitive nature of Lieutenant Chen's actions. She single-handedly saved an entire Afghan village from a coordinated terrorist attack, preventing what would have been a massacre of over 300 civilians, including 150 children." My mind flashed back to that day. The intelligence had been wrong. What was supposed to be a routine infrastructure assessment had turned into a nightmare when we discovered that the school I was inspecting had been rigged with enough explosives to level half the village. The terrorists had been planning to detonate it during a community celebration that evening. I'd had a choice: evacuate and let them escape to try again, or stay and disarm enough of the devices to minimize casualties while calling in an airstrike on the terrorist compound. I'd chosen to stay. "The problem," the FBI agent continued, "is that Lieutenant Chen's identity and location have been classified for her own protection. The terrorist cell she disrupted has put a significant bounty on her head. When her travel plans were entered into the system today, it triggered automatic security protocols." Morrison nodded grimly. "We cannot legally take off with Lieutenant Chen aboard without appropriate security measures in place. Federal Air Marshal protocols require that any Medal of Honor recipient traveling commercially be accompanied by protective detail, especially when there are known threats. The cabin was still silent, but the quality of the silence had changed. Where before it had been frustrated impatience, now it was stunned shock. Dr. Reynolds was the first to speak, her voice barely a whisper. The Medal of Honor? Whitmore looked like he'd been punched in the stomach. His face had gone pale, and for the first time since I'd seen him, he was speechless. That's right, Morrison said. While you've all been complaining about delays, you've been sitting next to one of the most decorated heroes in American military history. Someone who risked her life to save hundreds of innocent people. Quote. Kumar had slumped back into his seat, his earlier indignation completely deflated. Foster was staring at me with what looked like genuine shame. The FBI agent checked his watch. The security detail should be arriving within the next 10 minutes. Once they're in position, we can proceed with departure. But Morrison wasn't finished. I want to address something else while we're waiting. I've been flying commercial aircraft for 31 years. I've transported presidents, senators, celebrities, and billionaires. But I've never been more honored to have someone aboard my aircraft than I am today. He turned to face the cabin directly. Lieutenant Chen was traveling to Colorado Springs for her father's funeral. Colonel Michael Chen, who served our country for 30 years before passing away while his daughter was deployed overseas, defending the freedoms that allow all of you to conduct your business and live your lives safely. The weight of his words settled over the cabin like a heavy blanket. Several passengers were now openly staring at me, but the looks had changed completely. Where before I'd seen dismissal and annoyance, now I saw something that looked like awe mixed with shame. So when some of you complained about being delayed, Morrison continued, his voice gaining strength, you were complaining about waiting for a woman who has given more to this country than most of us can imagine. A woman who was traveling to bury the father she couldn't say goodbye to because she was too busy saving other people's children. Jennifer, the flight attendant who had barely acknowledged me earlier, stepped forward. Her eyes were bright with tears. Lieutenant Chen, I'm so sorry. I didn't know. Thank you for your service doesn't even begin to cover it. Marcus, the airport employee who had stood up for me at check-in, had somehow made his way onto the aircraft. He was standing near the door, his face beaming with pride. I knew there was something special about her, he said to anyone who would listen. You could just tell. But it was Whitmore's reaction that surprised me most. The man who had complained loudest about the delay, who had dismissed me as unimportant, slowly walked over to where I was standing. His face was red, whether from shame or emotion I couldn't tell. Lieutenant, he said, his voice barely audible, I owe you an apology, a profound apology. I had no idea. Quote, You couldn't have known, I replied quietly, though something in my tone made it clear that his behavior had been noted. No, but that's not an excuse, he continued. The way I acted, the things I said, you deserve better, you deserve respect, regardless of your rank or decorations. But knowing what you've done, what you've sacrificed. He trailed off, shaking his head. Dr. Reynolds had approached as well, and I could see the internal struggle playing out on her face. Lieutenant Chen, I was completely out of line. My procedures tomorrow, they're important, but they're nothing compared to what you've done. I'm ashamed of how I behaved. One by one, other passengers began approaching. Not all of them. Some remained in their seats, processing what they'd learned, but enough that I began to feel overwhelmed by the attention. An elderly woman from economy class had tears streaming down her face. My grandson is serving in Afghanistan right now, she said. Knowing there are people like you over there, watching out for our boys, thank you doesn't seem like enough. A young businessman who had been complaining about missing a client meeting now looked embarrassed. I feel like such an idiot, he said. Here I was worried about a sales presentation while you were... God, I can't even imagine. But not everyone was ready to accept their mistake. A woman in seat 4B, someone I hadn't interacted with earlier, stood up with her arms crossed. This is all very touching, she said sarcastically, but I still don't understand why the rest of us should be punished for one person's security issues. The cabin fell silent again, but this time the silence was hostile, directed at her, not at the situation. Morrison's voice was ice cold when he responded. Ma'am, if you have a problem flying with a Medal of Honor recipient, You're welcome to take another flight. I'm sure we can arrange for your luggage to be removed." The FBI agent stepped forward as well. I should mention that attempting to interfere with the transport of military personnel under federal protection is a federal crime. I'd suggest reconsidering any complaints about this situation. The woman sat down quickly, her face flushed with embarrassment and anger. That's when I noticed something else happening. Passengers were pulling out their phones, not to complain or make angry calls, but to take pictures and record videos. Not of me. The FBI agent had made it clear that wasn't allowed. But of the scene, of the aircraft, of this moment they were witnessing. "This is incredible," Kumar was saying into his phone. "I'm on a flight with a Medal of Honor recipient, an actual hero, and I almost... God, I'm such an ass." Foster was on her phone as well, but she was canceling meetings rather than bragging. "No, postpone everything. I don't care about the cost. Some things are more important than business deals." Even Whitmore had stepped away to make a call. I couldn't hear everything he was saying, but I caught enough to understand that he was postponing his merger. "This puts everything in perspective," he was telling someone. "The deal will wait." As we continued to wait for the security detail, something remarkable began to happen. Passengers started sharing stories about family members who had served, about their own experiences with the military, about times when they had or hadn't shown proper respect for service members. A young tech worker named Amanda confessed that she'd never really thought about what military service meant. "I've been so focused on my startup that I forgot there are people actually putting their lives on the line for the country while I'm worried about user acquisition metrics." An older businessman named Robert shared that his son was a Marine deployed overseas. "I've been so focused on making money that I haven't been writing to him as much as I should. This is a wake-up call." Jennifer and the other flight attendants had completely transformed their behavior. They were now treating me with a level of respect and attention that bordered on overwhelming. Offers of drinks, snacks, magazines, anything they could think of to make my flight more comfortable. "Lieutenant Chen," Jennifer said quietly, "I want you to know that everything today will be complimentary. The airline, when they hear about this, they're going to want to make this right." But the most meaningful interaction came from an unexpected source. A teenage boy, maybe 16 or 17, had been traveling alone in economy class. He approached nervously, his voice shaking slightly. "Ma'am? Lieutenant? I don't know what to call you," he began, "but I wanted to thank you. My little sister, she was adopted from Afghanistan 3 years ago. She was in an orphanage that got attacked by terrorists, but American soldiers saved her. Maybe it wasn't you, but it could have been, so thank you for what you do." That's what broke me. After all the dismissal, all the disrespect, all the anger and frustration of the day, it was the simple gratitude of a teenager that brought tears to my eyes. "What's your sister's name?" I asked. "Zara. She's 8 now. She loves drawing pictures of soldiers because she says they're the good guys who saved her." I reached into my carry-on bag and pulled out one of my military challenge coins, a tradition in the armed forces where officers carry special coins to present in recognition of exceptional performance, or simply to build morale. "Would you give this to Zara?" I asked, pressing the coin into his hand. "Tell her it's from one of the good guys." The boy's face lit up like Christmas morning. "Really? She's gonna flip out. This is so cool." By the time the security detail arrived, 2 plainclothes air marshals who blended seamlessly into the passenger list, the atmosphere on the aircraft had completely transformed. What had started as a cabin full of angry, entitled passengers complaining about delays had become something resembling a spontaneous appreciation ceremony. Captain Morrison made one final announcement as we prepared for departure. "Ladies and gentlemen, this has been an unusual flight in many ways, but I want to thank you all for your patience and understanding. We're now cleared for departure, and I promise you a smooth flight to Colorado Springs." He paused, then added, "I also want to say that in 31 years of flying, this has been one of the most meaningful pre-flight experiences of my career. Sometimes we need reminders of what real heroism looks like." As the aircraft began to push back from the gate, I settled into my seat, emotionally drained but oddly comforted. The day had started with me feeling invisible and disrespected. But now, as we climbed into the Colorado sky, I realized something important had happened. It wasn't just that people now knew who I was or what I had done. It was that they had been forced to confront their own behavior and attitudes. Some had risen to the occasion with grace and genuine remorse. Others had revealed their true character through their continued selfishness. But most importantly, I was heading home to honor my father's memory, and I was doing so with the knowledge that his lessons about service and sacrifice had not been forgotten. They had just needed the right moment to be remembered. As Denver disappeared beneath the clouds, I closed my eyes and thought about Dad. He would have been proud of how I'd handled the situation, with dignity and grace, even when others had shown me none. The flight to Colorado Springs was going to be just the beginning, because word was already spreading about what had happened on Flight 447, and by the time we landed, everything was going to change. The descent into Colorado Springs Regional Airport began 30 minutes early, thanks to favorable winds and priority air traffic clearance, benefits of having federal agents aboard. As we approached the runway, I could see something unusual through the small aircraft window. The terminal was bustling with activity that seemed far beyond normal for a regional airport on a Thursday afternoon. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Morrison," came the familiar voice over the intercom. "We're beginning our final descent into Colorado Springs. I want to thank you all again for your patience today, and I hope this flight has given you something to think about." He paused, and when he continued, his voice carried a weight that made everyone listen more carefully. "Lieutenant Chen, on behalf of Atlantic Airways and everyone aboard this aircraft, it has been our highest honor to fly you home today." The cabin erupted in spontaneous applause. Not the polite, obligatory clapping you sometimes hear when a pilot announces military personnel aboard, but genuine, sustained applause that seemed to come from a place of real respect and gratitude. I felt my cheeks burn with embarrassment, but also with something else, a recognition that maybe, just maybe, Dad would have been proud of this moment. As we touched down, I noticed more unusual activity. Fire trucks lined the runway, not for an emergency, but in formation, a water cannon salute typically reserved for retiring pilots or special occasions. Their lights were flashing in what looked like a coordinated display. "What's happening out there?" Dr. Reynolds asked, pressing her face to the window. One of the air marshals, who had been quietly observing throughout the flight, smiled slightly. "Word travels fast in military communities, ma'am, especially when it involves Medal of Honor recipients." The aircraft came to a stop at the gate, but instead of the usual rush to deplane, passengers remained seated. Captain Morrison emerged from the cockpit one final time, but he wasn't alone. Behind him walked a man in dress uniform, with stars on his shoulders, a general. The cabin fell silent again. "Ladies and gentlemen," Morrison announced, "I'd like you to meet General Patricia Williams, commanding officer of Fort Carson and the 4th Infantry Division." General Williams stepped forward, her bearing commanding instant respect. "Lieutenant Chen," she said, her voice carrying throughout the cabin, "by order of the Secretary of Defense and with the authorization of the President of the United States, you are hereby requested to report for a special ceremony honoring your service to this nation." I stood slowly, my mind reeling. This wasn't standard protocol. Medal of Honor recipients didn't get surprise ceremonies at regional airports. "General," I began, "I was told the ceremony already took place at the Pentagon." "That was the classified ceremony," she interrupted gently. "This is the public one, the one where the American people get to properly thank you for your service." She gestured toward the window. "Look outside, Lieutenant." I pressed my face to the small porthole and gasped. The terminal was packed with people, hundreds of them. Military personnel in dress uniforms, veterans in their service caps, civilians holding American flags, local news crews with cameras, children holding hand-drawn signs. But it wasn't just the crowd that shocked me, it was who was in it. Standing at the front of the gathering, in a place of honor, was Marcus Williams, the young airport employee who had stood up for me at check-in. He was no longer in his airport uniform. Instead, he wore the dress blues of the United States Army, with the distinctive patches of the 82nd Airborne Division. "Marcus," I whispered. General Williams smiled. "Staff Sergeant Marcus Williams, Bronze Star recipient, Afghanistan veteran, and currently serving in the Army Reserves while completing his college degree. He works at the airport part-time to help pay for school." The pieces clicked into place. Marcus hadn't just been a kind airport employee standing up for a fellow service member. He'd been a combat veteran who recognized another soldier being disrespected. "He called it in," General Williams continued. "When he saw how you were being treated, he contacted the base. That's how we found out you were traveling today." Whitmore, who had been listening to every word, stepped forward. "General, if I may, I owe Lieutenant Chen an apology. We all do." "Mr. Whitmore," the general replied, "I believe you'll have that opportunity shortly." As passengers began to deplane, something unprecedented happened. Instead of the usual rush to grab bags and hurry off, people lingered. They formed an impromptu receiving line, each wanting to shake my hand, to say something, to be part of this moment. Dr. Reynolds was among the first. "Lieutenant, I've been thinking about what you said earlier, about saving lives." "I save lives in an operating room, with a full medical team, in a sterile environment. You saved lives in a war zone, under fire, with limited resources." "I'm humbled by your service." Kumar approached next. "I've been posting about this on social media," he said, showing me his phone. "The story's already going viral. #on Flight 447 is trending. People need to hear about this." The elderly woman whose grandson was deployed overseas was crying again. "I called my grandson while we were waiting," she said. "Told him about meeting you. He says to tell you hua, and that he's proud to serve in the same army as you." But it was the teenager with the adopted Afghan sister who moved me most. "I called my parents," he said excitedly. "They're driving up from Denver with Zara. She wants to meet the soldier who gave her the coin." As I made my way through the aircraft and into the jet bridge, I could hear the crowd outside growing louder. When the door to the terminal opened, the sound hit me like a wall. "Chen, Chen, Chen!" The chant was deafening. The terminal had been transformed. American flags hung from every surface. A red carpet led from the gate to a small stage that had been hastily constructed. Local high school bands were playing military marches. Veterans organizations had set up displays honoring service members. But the most stunning sight was a massive banner stretched across the terminal's main concourse. "Welcome home, hero." General Williams walked beside me as we made our way through the crowd. People were reaching out to shake my hand, to touch my uniform, to thank me. Children were holding up drawings of soldiers and American flags. Veterans were saluting. "How did this happen so fast?" I asked the general. "Lieutenant, you underestimate the power of social media and the military community," she replied. "Marcus called the base. Passengers started posting about the flight. Local news picked it up. Within an hour, this was national news." She was right. I could see reporters from CNN, Fox News, and other major networks setting up their equipment. This had grown far beyond a simple airport arrival. As we reached the stage, I saw familiar faces in the VIP section. My commanding officer from Afghanistan, Colonel Rodriguez, had flown in from Fort Bragg. My old platoon sergeant, Master Sergeant Thompson, was there in dress uniform. Even some of the Afghan interpreters I had worked with, now resettled in the United States, had somehow made it to Colorado Springs. But the most shocking sight was in the front row of the civilian section. James Whitmore was there, but he wasn't alone. He'd brought his entire family, his wife, his 2 teenage children, and what looked like his elderly father, who was wearing a World War II veteran's cap. Dr. Reynolds was there too, still in her business attire but somehow looking more humble than she had on the aircraft. Kumar had set up his phone to live stream the event. Margaret Foster was taking notes in what looked like a personal journal. General Williams approached the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, fellow service members, and proud Americans, today we gather to honor extraordinary heroism in the face of overwhelming odds." The crowd fell silent except for the clicking of cameras and the whir of video equipment. 3 weeks ago, in a classified ceremony at the Pentagon, Lieutenant Sarah Chen received the Congressional Medal of Honor for actions that saved over 300 innocent lives in Afghanistan. Today, for the first time, we can share her story with the American people. What followed was a detailed account of that day in Afghanistan that I'd tried so hard to forget. The general described the intelligence failure that had led my team into what should have been a routine infrastructure assessment. She explained how we'd discovered that the local school had been rigged with enough explosives to level half the village. Lieutenant Chen faced an impossible choice, General Williams continued. Evacuate and allow the terrorists to escape and try again, or stay behind to disarm the devices while her team called in an airstrike on the terrorist compound. The crowd was utterly silent now. She chose to stay. For 6 hours, under sporadic enemy fire, Lieutenant Chen worked to disarm or relocate improvised explosive devices that had been strategically placed throughout the school and surrounding buildings. When the airstrike eliminated the terrorist threat, she had successfully neutralized 90% of the devices. General Williams paused, letting the weight of those words settle. The remaining devices were detonated in a controlled explosion that damaged only empty buildings. 347 civilians, including 150 children, went home safely that night because of Lieutenant Chen's courage. Quote, the applause that followed was thunderous. But General Williams wasn't finished. But today isn't just about honoring Lieutenant Chen's heroism in Afghanistan. It's about confronting something that happened right here, in our own country, just hours ago. The crowd quieted again, sensing a shift in tone. Today, on Flight 447, Lieutenant Chen was traveling home to bury her father, Colonel Michael Chen, a decorated veteran who served our country for 30 years. She was traveling in uniform, proudly displaying the decorations she earned through blood and sacrifice. And she was treated with disrespect and dismissal by people who should have known better. A few uncomfortable murmurs rippled through the crowd. This isn't about pointing fingers or assigning blame, General Williams continued. It's about recognizing that we, as a society, have sometimes forgotten how to recognize and honor the heroes among us. We've become so focused on celebrity and wealth that we've lost sight of what real heroism looks like. She gestured toward the VIP section. I want to recognize some passengers from Flight 447 who are here today, not because they're required to be, but because they chose to be. Because they realized that their actions today needed to be addressed. Whitmore stood when his name was called. His face was red, but he approached the microphone with obvious determination. My name is James Whitmore, he began, his voice shaking slightly. I'm the CEO of Whitmore Defense Solutions. I make a lot of money from defense contracts, money that comes from the taxpayers who support our military. But today, I failed to show respect to one of the people who actually earns that support. He turned to face me directly. Lieutenant Chen, I was rude, dismissive, and completely out of line. I complained about a flight delay while you were traveling to bury your father. I acted like my business deal was more important than your sacrifice. I was wrong, and I'm ashamed. He paused, gathering himself. But I want to do more than apologize. Effective immediately, Whitmore Defense Solutions is establishing the Colonel Michael Chen Memorial Scholarship for children of active duty military personnel. We're funding it with $2 million initially, and it will provide full college scholarships for kids whose parents are serving overseas. The crowd erupted in applause. Whitmore's teenage daughter was crying, obviously proud of her father's gesture. Dr. Reynolds approached the microphone next. I'm Dr. Patricia Reynolds, cardiac surgeon at Denver Presbyterian Hospital. Today, I acted like my convenience was more important than Lieutenant Chen's loss. I was traveling to a medical conference while she was traveling to bury her father. She took a deep breath. I've decided to establish a medical program providing free cardiac care for veterans and active duty military personnel. Because if I'm going to claim that I save lives, I should start by taking care of the people who risk their lives to save others. One by one, other passengers came forward. Kumar announced that his startup was pivoting to create technology solutions for veteran employment. Foster committed to donating a percentage of her real estate profits to housing programs for homeless veterans. But the most moving moment came when Marcus Williams approached the stage. Still in his dress uniform, he looked every inch the soldier he was. Ma'am, he said, addressing me directly, I've been working at that airport for 2 years, putting myself through college on the GI Bill. I've seen a lot of service members come through, and I've seen how some people treat them. What happened today wasn't unusual. It was just more visible. He turned to face the crowd. We need to do better. All of us. We need to remember that freedom isn't free, and the people who pay that price deserve our respect every single day, not just on holidays or when cameras are rolling. The crowd's response was electric. Veterans were standing, civilians were applauding, and I could see people wiping away tears throughout the terminal. General Williams retook the microphone. "Lieutenant Chen, would you like to say something?" I approached the microphone with trembling hands. The crowd fell silent, waiting. 3 days ago, I was in Afghanistan, worried about IEDs and mortar attacks, I began. Today, I'm standing in an airport terminal, overwhelmed by kindness and support. The contrast is significant. A few people chuckled, breaking some of the tension. My father, Colonel Michael Chen, taught me that service isn't about recognition or reward. It's about doing what's right because it's right. But today, I've learned something else. I've learned that sometimes recognition and respect matter, not for the person receiving them, but for the people giving them. I looked out at the crowd, seeing faces from the flight mixed with local families, veterans, and military personnel. When Mr. Whitmore and Dr. Reynolds and the others apologized today, they weren't just apologizing to me. They were acknowledging something bigger, that we all have a responsibility to see and honor the service and sacrifice happening around us every day. I paused, thinking about Dad, about the lessons he taught me, about the letter I still hadn't opened. My father died while I was deployed. I missed saying goodbye because I was serving our country. For the past 3 days, I've been angry about that. But today, I realized something. Dad didn't just die while I was serving. He died knowing that I was serving, and that would have made him proud. I pulled the unopened letter from my jacket pocket. I've been carrying this for 3 days, afraid to read it. But I think it's time. With shaking hands, I broke the seal and unfolded the paper. Dad's handwriting was shaky. The cancer had weakened him, but the words were clear. "Sarah, if you're reading this, it means I'm gone and you're home. I'm proud of you every day, but especially proud that you chose service over convenience, others over yourself. You are my legacy, and you are America's future. Don't let anyone tell you that your service doesn't matter. It does. Love, Dad." I had to stop reading for a moment to compose myself. "That's what this is really about," I continued. "Not just honoring those who serve, but remembering that service comes in many forms. Marcus serves by working 2 jobs to support himself through college. Dr. Reynolds serves by saving lives in the operating room. Mr. Whitmore serves by creating jobs and supporting our economy." I looked directly at the passengers from Flight 447. Today wasn't about you being bad people. Today was about all of us being reminded that we're part of something bigger than ourselves. The applause that followed was different from before. It wasn't just appreciation, it was understanding. As the ceremony concluded, something beautiful happened. Instead of dispersing, the crowd began forming small groups. Veterans were talking to civilians. Passengers from the flight were exchanging contact information with local families. Children were asking military personnel about their service. Whitmore approached me one final time. "Lieutenant, I meant what I said about the scholarship, but I want to ask you something else. Would you consider joining our board of directors? We need someone who understands what service really means." Dr. Reynolds extended a similar invitation. "I'd like you to help design our veteran medical program, if you're interested." Marcus had the biggest surprise of all. "Ma'am, I graduate next month with my degree in social work. I've been accepted to officer candidate school. I was wondering, would you write me a recommendation letter?" As the evening wound down, I found myself sitting in the airport chapel with General Williams. The chaos had died down, the crowds had dispersed, and tomorrow I would bury my father with full military honors. "How do you feel?" the general asked. "Overwhelmed, grateful, sad about Dad, but also hopeful." Hopeful? Today showed me something I'd forgotten. Most people want to do the right thing. They just need to be reminded what that looks like. General Williams nodded. "Your father would be proud, not just of your service in Afghanistan, but of how you handled today." As I prepared to leave the airport, I thought about the 12-part structure of stories like this. The hostile homecoming, the game-changing revelation, the investigation and confrontation, the breaking point, and finally, the reckoning. But this wasn't just a story about revenge or justice served. It was about something more powerful, transformation. Not just my transformation, from invisible soldier to recognized hero, but the transformation of everyone involved. Whitmore went from entitled businessman to committed philanthropist. Dr. Reynolds evolved from self-important surgeon to veteran advocate. Marcus revealed himself as both humble airport worker and decorated veteran. The passengers became ambassadors for military appreciation. And me? I learned that sometimes the most important battles aren't fought with weapons in foreign countries. Sometimes they're fought with dignity and grace in airport terminals, where the enemy isn't terrorism or insurgency, but indifference and disrespect. As I walked out of Colorado Springs Regional Airport, past the news crews and the lingering well-wishers, I thought about Dad's funeral tomorrow. It would be beautiful, meaningful, and properly honoring his service. But today had already honored him in a different way. Today had proven that the lessons he taught me about service and sacrifice weren't just military values, they were human values. And sometimes, those values need to be demonstrated not on foreign battlefields, but right here at home, in the everyday interactions that define who we are as a society. The story that started with, "They ignored me at the airport," had ended with something much more powerful, until everyone learned what ignoring heroes really costs. And that lesson would be remembered long after Flight 447 had been forgotten. If this story of recognition and respect resonated with you, comment hero below. If you've ever witnessed someone in uniform being disrespected, share your story. And remember, heroes aren't always easy to spot, but they're always worth honoring. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this story with someone who needs to be reminded what real service looks like.